One, two, three. One, two, three. What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and I'm doing a Days of Future Past Q&A, and my cat's meowing. I guess maybe my cat wants to be part of the discussion. I don't know. But as I promised, I have answers. You guys have questions, or maybe it should be you guys have questions. I have answers. I don't know. It doesn't really matter. But I've never really done anything like this before, so I have no idea how it's going to go. So it might be a little bit bumpy. It might be kind of a rough ride, but I think we'll get through it in one piece. So, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to kind of scroll through YouTube. I'm going to scroll through the comments that you guys left. Some of the comments, some of the questions that you guys had were answered by subscribers, which is great. That's really what I've been looking forward to. That's really what I was hoping would happen, is that some of you guys would kind of take up the mantle and take up the role of answering questions, that people had. But some of the questions that were answered in ways where I thought I could use a little more explanation. And so for those, I'll go ahead and expand a little bit further. But starting with the first question, starting with the top. The first question was, does the Days of Future Past link to the Age of Ultron? No, it does not. Under no circumstances can I really envision a scenario where that would happen. In the comics, that never happened, and they're two different universes, as it was explained by Eric Chaney, I think. The Age of Ultron storyline is an Avengers property. It's a Marvel Cinematic Universe property. The Age of Ultron was the result of Ultron rising to power, taking over the world, and of course, Ultron was a creation of Hank Pym, who was an Avenger. The Days of Future Past surrounds the X-Men group themselves, so they're really not intertwined, and they're held by two different production studios. So unless Marvel Cinematic Studios, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and Fox were to collaborate, I can't really see a way in which these two universes would cross over into one another. How far did the movie deviate from the comics? Who was the guy in the scene after the end credits? Okay. This is a really good question. I'm actually really excited for this. The movie deviated from the comics in a few ways. One, of course, the most notable example that everybody really is kind of talking about is that Kitty Pryde didn't go into the past. And in truth, I was really kind of disappointed by this, because I think that Ellen Page is a great actress, and it was really disappointing to see her kind of relegated to the catalyst for Wolverine going into the past, as opposed to her actually going into the past herself. In addition, we saw that Charles Xavier is alive. In the comic books, Charles Xavier was dead. He was one of the three people who was assassinated, which caused the Days of Future Past timeline. It was Charles Xavier, Senator Robert Kelly, and Maura McTaggart. In addition, we see that it's actually Boulevard Trask who's assassinated that leads to the Days of Future Past timeline instead of Senator Robert Kelly. We also see that Wolverine, of course, is the one that goes into the past, and we see some characters who are part of the future in the Days of Future Past that were never in the comic. We see Sunspot, and the way they did Sunspot, I thought was really kind of interesting. It really kind of seemed to be an amalgamation of Sunspot and Sunfire. Sunspot was able to absorb solar energy and turn it into physical strength, whereas Sunfire was able to absorb solar energy and turn it into plasma, turn it into like fiery plasma. And so it looked like a combination of both those characters kind of combined into one. I didn't really have any complaints, though. We saw Warpath, or I guess James Proudstar, and it's really kind of interesting when you get to his character, because he's the younger brother of John Proudstar. And if you guys recall our discussion about the X-Men, we talked about how Marvel rebooted the X-Men with Giant Size X-Men issue number 1 in 1975. The the Native American in that group is John Proudstar. That's the original Thunderbird, and of course he died not too long after he was introduced as part of the original X-Men. James Proudstar is his younger brother, and here's kind of a fun fact. In the normal mainstream Marvel universe, James Proudstar is actually a character called Warpath, and as Warpath, he was part of the New Mutants under Cable. So he's one of the members that we talked about, or he was one of the members that was part of X-Force when Deadpool first showed up in New Mutants issue number 98, when we were talking about our Deadpool comic. In addition, we also saw Blink, and I actually thought that was kind of cool to see her character. And Blink actually, I thought, played out pretty well. I mean, Blink creates portals, teleports people to different places. And for the most part, I was kind of glad to see new characters. I was kind of glad to see that they had taken a step away from the characters that we had seen, that we initially expected to see in the Days of Future Past, and included some characters that we will probably never see in any of the Fox films from here on out. So at the very least, it was really kind of cool to be able to see them in some form or fashion in a Fox Marvel film, as opposed to never seeing them at all. Another way that it differed is that Magneto was not confined to a wheelchair. This was actually really kind of interesting. One of the ironies that I thought was really kind of interesting about the original comic was that where Charles Xavier had spent so much time confined to a wheelchair, now it was Magneto who was confined to a wheelchair. And I think one of the most notable differences here is the fact that Wolverine talks about how in the dystopian future, you have humans working with Sentinels. In the Days of Future Past comic, that never happened. You had no humans working alongside Sentinels. You may have had, a guard or, guards to a degree or something like that, but you didn't have any humans that were, running the Sentinel program or anything like that. The Sentinel program was running itself. It was autonomous and it was self-controlling. And so they were carrying out their own orders and they were executing the programming that was given to them the only way they really knew how. I thought it was kind of interesting they included that. It's not really something that I cared for because I felt like it took away from the very basis of the Sentinel program run amok. But it really wasn't like a movie breaking thing. It really wasn't something that I felt like destroyed the entire movie overall. One of the other cool things, too, one of the other things that I thought was kind of interesting was Bishop. And Bishop, and we'll actually talk about him later because I think somebody asked a question about Bishop. Bishop was never part of the Days of Future Past storyline. He comes from a future that's very similar to the Days of Future Past, but it's not the Days of Future Past. So I was really kind of disappointed to see that. In addition, we also saw that in the concentration camps, you had humans and mutants. And you had you had mutants that had an M on their face, like Bishop has. That is a signature from Bishop's timeline. That is a brand that all mutants have so that people know they're mutants. Now, in the Days of Future Past timeline, in the outfits they wear, it has an M so that you know they're mutants, but they don't actually have a brand on their face, at least not that I'm aware of. There were some other differences here and there, but rather than go on for 10 minutes talking about the differences between the comic and the movie, I'm going to go ahead and bring this one to an end. Now, in terms of the guy at the end of the credits, that was Apocalypse, and I'm actually very excited about that. I am really, really psyched. There was some criticism. Some people thought that he looked like a younger woman and that Apocalypse was actually going to be a female, but I think it was just Apocalypse as a young teenager. I don't really think that it was Apocalypse as a woman or anything like that. And even if it was, it wouldn't really matter to me. I mean, it's not as I'm gender biased on, comic book characters or anything, but this is actually really kind of cool because we got to see apparently Apocalypse has already gained a cult following. He already has people that are following him. Now, as far as the time that he appears, I didn't see a date in terms of when this took place, so we don't really know if this is going on at the same time as the mainstream universe or if this is going on far into the past. Now, I could have very well missed that date. I could have very well missed the fact that it had a numerical date on it, but I'm not aware. I'm not sure that it did. So, I'm assuming that it is way in the past because we saw the pyramids being put together. So I figure, this is when the pyramids are being established. But we also saw his 4 horsemen in the background. Now, the 4 horsemen are interesting because I don't know who they're going to be. They could be anybody. It could be Archangel, it could be Wolverine, and it could be Gambit, or it could be any number of other characters. So, we don't really know who the 4 horsemen are actually going to turn out to be. It'll be really interesting to kind of see how it plays out. At that point in the past, I don't think it's going to be anybody that we know, just because there's really no notable Marvel characters that existed at that point in time in that period in Marvel Comics, aside from maybe Selene, Kane the Conqueror, people like that, the Fantastic Four that had briefly traveled into the past to try to stop Kane the Conqueror. I mean, we didn't really see any major notable characters at that point in time, but as I understand it, it'll probably just kind of be characters that'll be new. And I'm sure that when we see Apocalypse in the current timeline, in the Age of Apocalypse storyline, that the 4 horsemen will be composed of characters that we're aware of. Let's see. Continuing down here, does Emma Frost get mentioned at all? Yes, Emma Frost gets mentioned in passing, and that was actually answered by Gabriel Cruz. Emma Frost is mentioned a couple times. She's mentioned once when the younger Magneto is talking to the younger Charles Xavier, and they're really kind of arguing with each other while they're on the plane, and Magneto talks about how Xavier had abandoned them, and pretty much all the comrades, virtually all the cast that had appeared in X-Men First Class was dead. They had been, experimented on or killed outright or whatever the case may have been. But Emma Frost is one of those people who died. The second time that she's actually mentioned, I believe, is when, and I think this is actually where Gabriel Cruz had answered the question, was when Mystique was going through the files of Bolivar Trask, and she was listed as one of the people who had been killed, along with Azazel and Banshee, and it may have been a couple other people, but I don't remember who. Let's see.